Gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades.
Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to Gas Masks and Hand Grenades. It's your host, me, Jeff, and I am here today. We're sorry we're getting a little bit of a late start here. We're having some audio issues that I have to actually go live to test out what's going on here. But real quick, I'm going to do my intro, and we're going to assume that everything's okay. What do the genres of post-punk, new romantic, post-rock, stylish synth pop, experimental improvisational rock, progressive metal, and even cinematic soundtrack music all have in common? Glad you asked. They are genres and styles of music that my guest today has impacted with his playing and sound design over the last 45 plus years of his career. With his uniquely creative playing, sonic architecture, and songwriting in bands such as Japan, Porcupine Tree, the Dolphin Brothers, Jansen Barbieri Karn, Indigo Falls, and collaborations and live touring with No Man, Tim Bowness, and even his old bandmate in Japan, David Sylvian. And last but not least, he's released some absolutely killer solo albums starting in 2005 with his most recent dropping in 2021. I'm super excited to welcome my old buddy, Richard Barbieri, to Gas Mask. And there we are. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you, and guess what?
What?
Zero echo.
There we go then.
There we go.
Okay. So we can just establish this was your fault for using Chrome.
It was all my fault. It's always my fault. It's always been my fault, of course.
There we go.
All right. Boy, that is a big time relief. So I just ate up a half hour of my time with you.
You'd like me to,
Say again?
Anything else you'd like me to do to get this program going?
Well, if you could come over and mop my house, that would be a great big relief to me. It's in my condition. Yeah. It's hard these days. Nah, dude, it is so good to see you, man. It's been such a long time. And I want to thank you so much for doing this. It's crazy. It's been 13 years since I've seen you, Richard. It's just kind of bizarre. Now, the caveat to that before we start the interview and rage through it here is that I had tickets to see you guys back in September of last year in Philadelphia. And you very kindly and wonderfully bumped Serge up. I didn't come down because of my health, but you bumped Serge up from like our nosebleed seats to like the 8th row. Of course you did, and I didn't come, right? But but Tracy got to use that ticket, which was kind of cool. Yep. So, but I am really kicking myself in the ass for not coming down that day. But I was in a transitional phase with my situation, so want to thank you for that. And it's a bummer I didn't get to see you, but maybe in the future we'll have to see. So now that we've gotten all through that, I did mention that today is the 21st anniversary of In Absentia and also 13 years since we've seen each other. Let's jump into this thing. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, let's do it. So I like to take my guests back to their formative years, first of all, and start there. Tell me about some of your first memories of music and maybe how that early exposure to music might have affected you. In specific, do you have any special memories of, artists or bands or songs associated with memories from being a young kid? And by young, I mean in your, in your preteen years, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, my parents weren't particularly musical or didn't really have that kind of influence on me in anything to do with the arts, but my aunt was very influential. So she was like a kind of she did amateur dramatics and she loved music, poetry, film. And I used to go and stay with my aunt a lot when I was very young. And so she would be playing music all the time. And it would be stuff like the Beatles but going back to like Elvis Presley and even back to the big musicals, the Busby Berkeley musicals, And I'd record her and she'd sing along and she'd make up these little plays and everything. I've even used her voice on some recent music, actually.
No kidding. Samples.
Yeah, so that probably, she was a big influence on me. In terms of what really influenced me as a musician, it kind of was listening to music when I was, I don't know, about 15, 16. I used to listen to a badly tuned radio in bed at night. And you'd get all these weird stations coming in, and some things would kind of be happening at the same time. So you would hear what you thought was a musical piece, but it was two things.
Okay.
So I'd be hearing this music, and then there'd be a voice coming in as well. And I mean, that was really interesting to me. And I thought, this is really weird.
So we're talking the 60s here, or the late 50s?
No, 70s.
Oh, 70s we're into.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I listened a lot to John Peel as a DJ we had here in the UK, and heard a lot of weird stuff, early kind of experimental music, and it all just seemed very magical, especially because the radio would go in and out of tune, and you'd get these weird sounds coming in as well. And when I think about it, that's kind of how I go about making music. You know, I take kind of disparate sound sources, and I take them out of their context and put them into my context to become something else. And that for me was the most interesting part of music, not being technical. It was more about the process and about trying to find new ways of making sounds and atmospheres.
When you started to become a musician, so we're talking, did you do the I guess I don't know what you call middle school over there, like 6th, 7th, 8th grade, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Is that primaries?
No, primary is when you're very young, and then you go to secondary school from about 11 until 16 or 17.
Okay, so when you were in your primaries, were you doing the things like the recorder and the violin, or did you try any of those things?
I didn't try any, but I did a lot of recording, yeah. And as I said, it was mainly my aunt, who was this larger-than-life character.
Okay.
If you can imagine a kind of Joan Crawford type figure.
Okay. Yeah.
She was kind of a
little bit
like
right
that.
On the edge.
On the edge, yeah.
On the edge.
Yeah, she did have some delusions, and it was...
was this reel-to-reel you're using, I'm assuming? Or
Just
a cassette?
Cassette machine.
A cassette, okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to date you too old now, aren't I?
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you're putting me back in.
Son of a bitch, you.
60s, yeah.
Well, we're not that far off of each other, not much.
Yeah.
So how, when, where does the keyboard or piano, or was that the first thing that you actually gravitated to pick up and start to learn, or what? Did you try the guitar or drums?
No, I never tried guitar.
Okay.
No, the keyboard was first, and I quickly became aware that, you know, I wasn't that great on it. So I struggled a bit in the beginning to find my place within what was then the early version of the band. And it wasn't until I got the first synthesizer that I started to do things that were different, and suddenly I sort of found a voice, and I was able to do something that had its place, which gave me more confidence. And then I felt like, yeah, I'm one of the band now.
Well, when you say the band, I think you're probably referencing Japan, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So was that your very first actual band that you ever joined and started to play with?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you didn't go through the high school thing, jamming with dudes and all that kind of stuff then, apparently, right? Or did you?
No, not really. But we were at school. I mean, we were in the last year of school, and they already had something going. You know, they'd get together and jam. And then I went to work in a bank for about a year and a half. But during that time, I was still friends with them. And then I got involved with it. They asked me to join.
So you knew them from high school? Were you older or younger? I forget.
Well, I was the same kind of age as Mick Karn and David Sylvian, and Steve Jansen was 2 years below us.
He was younger. Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. And you guys were buddies in school, so they knew you in that respect. And when they're kind of getting Japan rolling, did they just give you a call and say, "Why don't you just come hang out?" Or were you buddies with them and just you were kind of hanging around the band.
Happens. You know, it happens. You do anything to get away from the boredom of it all, and so you go around each other's houses and you play records, and
right,
you know, and eventually you get these beginnings of instruments. You know, Steve would just have a couple of bongos. That would be, you know, David would have an acoustic guitar. Mick would have a cheap kind of bass, and you just start trying to do things. And,
just banging stuff out, basically.
Yeah, of course. You know, and all the time you're listening to the great music around at that time.
Right.
Anything from kind of Bowie and Roxy music to David Cassidy and David Essex.
Right. And those were the influences, the early influences on Japan. Was there much of a punk influence in the early years of Japan, or like I would say the 76, 77 period?
Yeah, but New York punk, but American punk.
New York Dolls,
kind of Television, Patti Smith, Iggy Pop, Talking Heads. There was more kind of art to it. It was more interesting.
It was more elevated as opposed to
it was more elevated.
The Sex Pistols,
exactly. Yeah. And it was further away.
Right. Of course.
You know, it's this mythical place, you know, like New York. It's just like, wow.
Let's get there someday, right?
Yeah. Whereas we weren't interested in people who came from the same place as us and just kind of were reveling in the fact that they couldn't play and that they didn't like anything, and they weren't interested in anything, and everything was like vacant. And that wasn't the point for us. It was more about learning about interesting things. You know, there were punks in New York who were kind of almost poetic with their lyrics, and you know, Patti Smith especially. But they were punks.
Well, what were you listening to a lot at that period in the mid to late 70s? Was it primarily Roxy and Bowie and Eno and things of that nature?
Well, it was all the kind of glam stuff that was in the UK. Yeah, so Bowie, Roxy music, whatever. But also, as I say, a lot of the American stuff.
Okay.
So, you know, Talking Heads, Iggy Pop, Lou Reed.
Velvet Underground, stuff like that.
Yeah, a real mixture. And, you know, David loved Tamla Motown. He loved Motown. So you can hear that in a lot.
You can hear that in his voice, of course.
Yeah, and whenever Japan did a cover, it was usually a Tamla.
Okay.
Tamla.
Did you aspirationally see yourself becoming a professional musician? I mean, was that the goal in the back of your mind, or was it just kind of happening as it went?
I think the goal was to be able to continue doing what we're doing and not be living at home.
And not have to get a real job, essentially. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it was just to be involved in music and doing what we were doing. We didn't really think about fame or anything like that. We'd have been happy if we could just play music all the time and be in the studio all the time.
How were your parents? How did they feel about your direction as you started to move through high school? What would be I don't know what you guys call it again. I'm sorry. Are they trying to say, Rich, you need to go on to university, or you need, you know, or what's happening there with that dynamic?
My parents, to their credit, were very supportive, and although they probably thought that, they didn't voice it, and they didn't put any pressure on me. So they kind of supported me in going forward with music. And I guess, you know, when I used to come home with blue hair and black lipstick, they probably just said to the neighbours, "Oh, he's in show business." You know, that's what we do.
I was going to pull some of those pictures up, but I decided not to.
The other guys in the band suffered a bit more. Their parents weren't so supportive, and their home life was a bit more turbulent and difficult.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, any evening that they could get out of the house and be somewhere else was something special.
What was the first album you bought with your own money? I'm curious. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was Electric Warrior.
Mark Bolan.
Yeah.
T-Rex, yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a great album, man. I was just kind of doing a little bit of a deep dive on him recently, and I forgot about Steve Peregrine Took
Yeah.
and his relationship to that whole thing. And yeah, an interesting guy. We're doing some stuff with that soon to come. But what was your first concert? Do you remember that? I mean, by concert, I mean like big concert, not the club type, going down to the club type thing.
Yeah, I used to go to a lot of concerts. I think probably the first big one was Queen.
Wow.
Yeah.
For what album? Do you remember what year?
It would have been from the second album, I think. It was like 1974.
2. Oh, 4. That's 4.
Maybe
right.
Sheer Heart Attack. That's it. Third album.
Oh, third album. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
my God. Wow. Where were they playing?
That was at the Rainbow, I think. It's not there anymore.
Right.
In London, but I think that was a Rainbow. But I've seen them quite a few times.
That's one band I missed. Him, and I missed Queen, and I missed Bowie. And I had an opportunity to see Bowie on the Earthling tour, and Nine Inch Nails was with them. They were opening for Bowie, and we just had Maddie, my daughter Maddie. I don't know if you remember little Maddie. Maddie's 26 now.
Yeah.
But I kind of had that. I got that look from my ex-wife that said, if you go to that show, just, your stuff will be out on the front porch when you come home. Because Maddie had night terrors and she would wake up at all hours of the night. And it was just one of those things where I thought better of it. And one of the few times I probably heeded that look and thought, yeah, I'm just going to sit this one out. But I never got a chance to see Bowie again. I'm sure you've seen him, right?
I've seen him twice. On 1974 again would have been the Aladdin Sane tour.
Last of the Ziggy stuff.
Yep, the Ziggy stuff, and then Station to Station.
Wow, amazing.
At Wembley.
Hey, so going back to Japan real quick, because I want to keep moving for you. What are your memories of, how long were you guys like writing and rehearsing before you actually went to play your first live gigs? And in addition, what are your memories of that first gig opening for the Fabulous Poodles, my friend? Do you remember it?
Yeah. Well, vaguely. We started doing shows, I call them shows, gigs, quite early on. There'd just be like youth centres and pubs, and there'd be no one there. And sometimes they'd kind of ask us to stop playing and just go home. And we supported a lot of different people as well. It was quite weird. We supported, as you say, the Fabulous Poodles. We supported the Damned.
Wow.
Osibisa.
Don't know that
group.
Okay.
And we went on tour as a support to Jim Capaldi from Traffic.
Oh yeah. When was that?
And Steve Winwood was playing with him as well.
What year was that?
78.
Holy mackerel! How about that?
77 or 78. Yeah.
Well, now when you're first playing with them, do you come in? Are you just playing a standard, like, I don't know, Hammond B3 or a Fender Rhodes, or what are you playing at that point in time? Because you said you didn't have your first synthesizer yet. So what are you monkeying around on at that point?
Well, by the time we started doing gigs, I did. So I did have a what would be considered quite a nice setup. So it was just the Wurlitzer electric piano.
Okay. Yep.
And the Micro Moog on top, which was like a mini Moog, but just a kind of cut down version of a mini Moog.
Yeah. How many keys on that one? Is that 2 octaves?
It's behind me. 3 octaves.
3. Okay. Nice. And that's your original one?
That's it. Yeah.
No way.
Yes, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious then, how does the band become, and look, just to be fair, I don't want to spend a lot of time on Japan because you've talked a lot about it throughout your life. And there is a great book out there by Anthony Reynolds, I believe is his name.
Yep.
And I forget the name of it. I wrote it down. I can't find it. Where's it at? What's the name of it, Rich? Sorry.
I forget the name of it.
A Foreign Place,
Is
which
it?
came out in 2015.
Okay,
Looks like.
that's it. Yep.
So I'm not going to spend too much time on Japan simply because I want to talk more about your solo and your collaboration work and things like that. But I was curious to know, how did the band come to the attention of someone that got you in front of record executives? Was it simply by gigging, or was it by word of mouth by somebody in the industry that was, watching you as support? And then I guess that leads to this character named Simon Napier Bell, right? Is that when he enters the picture, or what happens there?
That's basically it. Yeah, it was just a case of getting somebody who was quite an important figure at the time and could walk into any office. That was it. Somebody else got us to that point to get to Simon. And then once he took over, he did the usual thing. He tried to convince David to go solo and get rid of the rest of the band.
Of course.
That's what they always do to any single band, because it's easier. It's easier to deal with one person.
Right.
But obviously David wasn't having that, so it didn't happen. And from that point on, he just kind of controlled stuff and managed to get us a record deal.
Now, when you're getting this record deal, how old are you at this point? The first record deal?
I think 18 or 19.
And were you, and I remember, might be delicate territory. If I recall correctly, that record deal was not very good for you guys.
I don't think any record deals were good in those days.
Well, good point. And they continued that until people started licensing. But did you bring your parents in? Did you get
Steve
lawyers?
Steve had to bring his parents in because he was too young to sign. As for lawyers, we would have used the manager's lawyers. As for accountants, we would have used the manager's accountants.
Yeah.
And as for the company, it would have been the manager's company in an offshore.
Vertical integration.
Yeah. So basically, there would be no access for us to know anything about really what was going on.
Yeah.
But that's pretty standard in those days.
Yeah. How does the band? Okay, so your first album, you go on and record, and that's Adolescent Sex, right? How does the band and really in the scope of bands, you guys were together about 8 years, right? Essentially. Yeah. How does the band start out kind of in this glam rock sort of vein? How do things start to transition to where we have that, and then at the end we have Tin Drum, which is kind of its own unique sound unto itself and really doesn't sound like anyone before or really after? How does that start to occur? And while it's occurring, you guys are doing a lot of road work, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a natural evolution in a way. Everything becomes more. You learn more. The music becomes more sophisticated, better recorded. Performances are better. You start getting more ideas. And you improve as a person, you improve as a musician. So it took us from what was that first album right through a series of step ups to writing quite kind of complex and unique music, I think.
And I think to a large extent, both you and David, and maybe even Steve as well, you guys are getting more into synthesizers and sequencers and things of that nature. What was the process? The technology kind of helped usher in this new sound for you guys to a large extent. What I guess my question is, there's a pretty good learning curve for that kind of stuff for a lot of people. Like I've tried with just rack mount effects processors, and I'm like the stupidest guy in the world. But give me an electric guitar, I can make a lot of noise and play pretty well on it. But I can never figure out processing. What were you guys all learning together? Were you all working together on these things, or were you kind of doing your own thing? And when did you learn you had that aptitude? Like, how did you know?
Well, like I say, when I first started using synthesizers, it was that became my voice within the band. And I guess the third album, Quiet Life, was the first album to feature the keyboards quite heavily. And so we were using sequencers, and the sequencer became an integral part of a lot of the songs on that album, which was kind of in keeping with the technology and the times. The first two albums were quite guitar dominated.
Right. Yes.
So, that was the way it was going. That was a cool sound. That was what everybody seemed to like, the sound of synthesizers. And by that time, I was kind of an equal, I'd say, contributor within the group. It probably took till that third album for me to feel that way.
David was the primary writer as a guitar player and singer, or was it him and Steve and Mick, or how'd that work out early on?
Well, no, he wrote everything.
Oh, he wrote everything.
Okay. He wrote everything. I mean, in that he came up with the song and the lyrics,
mm-hmm.
the vocal line. I mean, it was heavily arranged by us.
Mm-hmm.
In today's climate, possibly you would have some kind of recompense for your arrangements or your melodies or your, certain sections you've written in a song. But
right.
In those days, it was just, I think the management said, look, it's easier if one person writes the songs, and that's the way it goes.
Well, then that begs the question, was all the publishing money going to him, or was he being democratic and giving you guys stuff, or no?
No, it all went to him, which kind of at that point creates a
lot of problems.
Well, an unequal situation in the group, because you all go into debt equally for the record royalties. So
the
money that the record label give you each individually owe an equal part back each.
Right.
And you all go on tour and you all promote that album and you all do these things together. And then the second album, you go further in debt. But all that time, the publishing is just going to one person. So eventually you get to a place where one person will leave home and have a nice flat. You'll still be at home with your parents.
Yeah.
And it creates a kind of, a division.
A lot of dissension slowly builds.
Case of how, if people can live with that, then that's fine,
Right.
But it took a while for us to kind of get away from home.
Well, okay, so, and I think in later situations, in particular in Porcupine Tree, it wasn't quite that way, if I remember correctly, right?
No, Porcupine Tree's great. It's always been
democratic.
It's always been very good.
Yeah.
Stephen's always been very, very fair from the start. And it's kind of ended up now, 2023, as a complete democracy.
Yeah, three-way democracy, right.
And co-written, and basically Gavin and I run the show more or less, I suppose.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
Leave that. So it's a long journey to get to that point, but I never really had a problem with the way Porcupine Tree was run.
Well, okay, so I mean, I take it in conversations we've had in the past that you haven't really even spoken to David in quite a lot of years. I don't think anybody has from the band. Does his brother even speak with him, or that you know of?
No, not as far as I know. I don't know. I don't know what he's doing or where he is.
Has he retired entirely from the music business? Because it's been a while.
No idea. I really have no idea. I last saw him when I was on tour with Porcupine Tree.
You told me about this.
We were playing in Boston, and he lived, I think, in New Hampshire or somewhere near at that time. And I just said, let's have a coffee, And that's probably the last time I saw him. Well, it is the last time I saw him. And
that's probably 10, 15 years now, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
So are all of you guys that aren't David Sylvian in the band slowly developing a little bit of animosity about that situation then, I assume? I would be.
No, not really, because we didn't understand. We didn't.
At the time.
It's almost like these kind of things come to light after, when you start to understand.
Okay.
there wasn't that animosity. We felt like we were all in it together.
And you're splitting the proceeds of touring, what little there might be.
Yeah, there was none.
Amongst. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I think that's the thing people do not understand about the 70s and bands. Even a band, you guys weren't as big as Pink Floyd, obviously. You weren't, or even maybe even Rush or Kiss or something, but you were a pretty big band in that genre of music and that niche of music. You guys were selling out Budokan several nights in a row. I mean, that's not something many musicians now could ever do. Okay. And even back then, it was not a typical thing, right? Where did all that money go, Rich? Where do you surmise it went? Do you want to answer that or not?
Well, I mean, the book explains it quite well.
Okay.
But yeah, a lot of money was made. Well, the manager was taking commission off of the gross.
A massive amount.
Not the nets, just the gross. So
yeah.
Regardless of what expenses were incurred or whatever.
Exactly.
And of course, the agent takes commission off of that as well, off the top. And as I say, there were offshore companies where the money was going into.
And disappearing.
Yeah, I mean, if you work out the amount of people we played to and the ticket prices, and we didn't have a big stage set or anything, you know.
Yeah, right.
And the funny thing is, during that time, we always flew economy. And often, when we went to Japan, we had to get about 4 different planes to get there.
Oh, right. Okay.
So so it was like, it was economizing with the group so that we didn't spend any money. And we were changing at Delhi, Abu Dhabi, Singapore. I mean, we're absolutely shattered.
Yeah. But you guys are young guys, so the management team
it was all fun, yeah. But
the management team is riding you all the way, is essentially what's going on.
Of course.
Yeah. I remember you telling me a story about going, I believe you were going to Japan for Japan gigs, and one Mr. Gary Newman was on the plane following you or tagging along. Was that?
Yeah, that's a very unfortunate story, that.
Really?
Yeah, really, because by all accounts, I mean, Gary Newman's a lovely person.
Mm-hmm.
And
he really is.
Just kind of looking at interviews and the things he says and everything, he comes across a really nice guy.
Genuine.
And we didn't really know what was going on. Possibly Mick did, I'm not sure. But what happened was, I think he was promised either by our management or by somebody working for the band that he was going to come on stage with us.
Oh, wow.
In Japan.
This is when he was already
He was already big. He was bigger than us. He was bigger than us, and but he was a fan.
Yeah.
You know, he just was a fan of ours. He just followed, you know, liked us a lot. So I didn't know why he was on the plane coming to Japan. I didn't know why he was on the train when we were in Japan. I thought that he was kind of just stalking us or something. And
it's Jeff Kiefer again.
I know. And of course, we're quite shy as well. And we always came across as being a bit standoffish, which we weren't. We were just shy and we weren't very good socially. Right. But of course, from his point of view, I've heard the story and it's heartbreaking. You know, I mean, he was on his own there in Japan and he thought something was going to happen and we were all blanking him. And in the end, he was just left behind. You know, we just left him behind somewhere and he didn't know where to go and he was on his own.
Oh, shit.
And eventually, I don't know how it happened, but he ended up at a Queen concert and they took real good care of him.
Do you know what year this was? Do you remember what year it was?
I can't. Well, it would have been 80.
Oh, so it was actually after Cars then when he was huge. Yeah.
And I think Freddie Mercury sort of got him a McDonald's or something because he didn't eat, you know, he didn't like eat other food. And
that's insane.
I
didn't know that part of it.
It's very sad. And
I met him in 2013. I met him a couple times, and
that's why I said to you to tell him that we're really sorry for that. Well, I'm sorry for that, but I didn't
Yeah.
know that I was doing anything. I didn't know what was going on.
He's a lovely guy. And
I'm
when I
sure.
brought you up in 2013, his face just beaming. He's like, oh, I love those guys. Love that band. He didn't bring up the plane story though. So, but I mean,
it's worth investigating that, because it's, oh, I had tears in my eyes. It's terrible.
Well, if I ever get him on the show, I'll make sure that we rectify that situation. So moving on real quick, the band splits up in '82, right? And what can you just give a quick thumbnail of like how, why, when, and what the final sort of denouement of everything was and why it happened? Just creative differences, or just you hated each other by that time?
No, I think everybody could give a different answer, and they'd all be
Different.
a little bit true. It's that kind of thing. I think Mick wanted to go solo, and David wanted Mick to wait until the group had finished before he went solo, and to just concentrate in the group. But Mick wanted to do that. So that was a problem. David and Mick were clashing a lot.
Right.
Egos come to the fore more when you become successful. That's when it starts to happen. And you start to see kind of more is revealed, let's say.
Yeah.
Then there was the thing with the girlfriend of Mick was then living with David, and that was another thing.
Oh yeah, that's always a difficult situation. Yeah.
There were so many different reasons.
Yeah. Well, anybody that wants to know that,
it's been gone over so many times.
Yeah, I know, and I wanted to move on from that real quick. So get the book by Anthony Reynolds. You can get it on Burning Shed if you want. And I don't have it. I kind of forgot about it, and I'm gonna have to pick that up because I want to know that story. So then the band splits, and you team up with some of the rhythm section of the band. The three guys remain. And we should mention too, real quick, that as the band escalated more into sonic territory with synthesizers and keyboards, Rob Dean, who was the original guitar player in the band, I think he was the last member to join, kind of was phased out more or less. I guess he kind of realized that there's not really a place for me here. So he was gone by the last album.
He was gone by, the last album. Yeah.
Okay. And I did not pull all my albums. I apologize for that. They're kind of stuck in boxes all over my apartment. I can't actually display a lot of my collection. So, although I do have the Tin, have you ever seen the Tin Drum box set?
I don't think so.
I'll have to pull that real quick.
I think it was CD box set.
Yeah, it's the CD box set, the little one. Yeah. Really nice, cool little. Was that for the 30th? Maybe I think it was for the 30th or 35th anniversary. So you team up with your partner Steve, initially with the Dolphin Brothers, correct? That's kind of the first thing that you started to do post Japan.
The first thing we did post Japan was an ambient album called Worlds in a Small Room, and that was a commission for from JVC in Japan. To make some music for the space shuttle.
Okay.
Launch.
And that was you and Jansen, just you and Steve.
That was just me and Steve.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was 1984. That was the first thing that we did together.
And then at that point, you do, I believe it's 2 Dolphin Brother albums, correct?
No, one. And a single. Yeah.
Okay. And the single was Shining, right?
Yep.
Okay. I have to ask.
Okay.
I'd never seen that video until this morning. I didn't know it existed.
Okay.
And the Dolphin Brothers is one thing I don't know of your wide array of releases that I don't own anything by. But I had heard it because I want to say 2004, 5. Tracy and I were out at a record store down in Maryland when I was hanging out with her, and I found a copy of it in the wild for $3-4, maybe $5, and I bought it, and I never came home with it. I was not allowed to leave Tracy's place.
Well,
So
You didn't miss it. Didn't miss much, to be honest.
Well, no, I'd like to have it. It's probably, I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't know if you ever go on eBay and look up the JBK stuff and a lot of those middle releases and things like that. Even the early Japan albums, the original presses, it's insane what they're going for. I mean, I found a copy today of Beginning to Melt. I had to pay $24 for it. And, I don't mind because I love that album and I needed and wanted a real copy of it. But that's kind of pushing the boundaries of what I want to pay for a CD at this point. You know what I mean? But some of the stuff, there was a copy of, I forget which album it was now. It might have been Ism. This dude wants like $90 for it. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. As bad as I want it, I don't want it that bad. So this stuff we'll get to that in a sec here as far as reissues and things. What was the significance of the Dolphin Brother name? What was the deal with that?
Just trying to come up with names,
Was there an ironic part of it, or was
not
it just
really?
No.
No, I mean, we originally wanted to go with the name The Grayscale, but the label didn't really want that, and I can't remember. I think we gave them a load of different names, and they just liked the sound of that one. We kind of resigned to Virgin, and I think that's a case of us making an album that wasn't really us being us, if you know.
Okay. And that video for Shining,
that 80s kind of pop thing,
yeah,
and trying to come up with clever arrangements, trying to write pop music, and that's not what Steve and I were about, really. I think we could play within pop songs and we could arrange within pop songs, but I don't think writing them and performing them and in a genuine way wasn't us.
Okay.
And I think he feels the same way. There's a couple of tracks on it that I think stand up well, but I think
it's not a bad album.
I mean, there's a lot of love for it.
It's of the era. It's of the era.
It's of the era, but there's a lot of love for it out there.
But I have to ask, what the hell is going on in that video? Steve is a mini person. He's a small person in a box. You, I think, are trying to erect a tent, maybe going on a camping trip in the English countryside. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I only watched it once and I hated it. I absolutely hated it.
I can't imagine why.
But it was a case of getting an amazing director,
okay,
and not going with the director's ideas. So the guy who we had directed was a guy called Mark Romanek, who did the Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson video.
No way, for real?
Yeah, and he directed 24-Hour Photo,
okay,
and a film called Static. And no, we just we should have let him go with his idea, but we didn't, and it came out as this compromise, and it was just awful.
Well, who wrote the treatment for the actual video?
Kind of both of us. It was just.
What do you got? You guys, I know you're not a drug guy, so you weren't tripping on acid, but it sort of feels like that's what's going on with that video at times.
Yeah. Well,
it's weird. It's a weird video.
Better.
Yeah, we'll move on from that. So you do that, and you do then Japan kind of resurfaces again momentarily, a blip on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
You do the Rain Tree Crow album, and that comes out in 1999. Was there, since the friction had occurred, now you're about 8 years on from that. David's got his solo career is doing fairly well, and it's very experimental, and he's taking the Japan thing to the next level, so to speak. You guys you hadn't yet done JBK, right? But
Mm-hmm.
had you done some JB material at that point yet?
Yeah, I think we had.
Okay. And you kind of went back to what you really wanted to do with you and Steve, being more of a
more kind of alternative. Yeah. interest in instrumental music. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of it kind of improv in a lot of ways. I mean, when you listen to that early JB Jansen Barbieri material and then the Jansen Barbieri Karn material, it feels like there's a lot of improvisational stuff that's kind of developing these tracks, right? So I sense, I could be wrong, and you'll tell me, I'm sure, that you guys are getting together, jamming, and you're coming up with these arrangements as you're playing them.
Yeah, I think there was a lot more of that.
Right. And
Myself, Mick, and Steve socialized all the time.
okay.
So we would often, be in situations where we could get together and make some music and just mess around.
Where did you jam at? Did you have a rehearsal spot, or did you jam at?
No, we'd do it at Mick's house a lot of the time. Sometimes we'd go into a studio, book a studio in the countryside for a week or so. But yeah, generally when we kind of jam together, something interesting would always come out of it. So they were enjoyable, those albums, and the Ism album that was a JBK album. That I think is one of the best things we did.
Yeah, I have a question about that in a minute here. To circle back to Rain Tree Crow quickly,
Sure.
Was that idea to regroup based on band members wanting to reunite, or were you getting management, chatter in your ear? Hey, by the way, Virgin wants to sign you, and they're going to give you
there was no management really.
Okay.
To speak of at that time. It would always be a case of David and Mick agreeing to come up with something. Steve and I didn't get involved in that because if they weren't going to do it, then it wasn't going to happen. So that was always the dispute was always going to be between Mick and David. So
okay,
if the two of them could reconcile and think about moving forward and making some music together, then we all started talking about it.
Okay, gotcha. Were they the alpha personalities in the band in a way, or no?
Sorry, were they what?
Were they the alpha personalities in the band in terms of like, I want to be the head guy, the head honcho, or no?
I guess so. I mean, yeah. I mean, they were the two with the egos.
Okay, the most outspoken sort of.
Yeah.
Me. Yeah.
Whatever way it's presented, it can be presented in the opposite way, but it's still there. But basically, the control battle and the whole emotional battle, it was always something going on between them. Steve and I never had that problem. And was
there ever any plans to tour that album, The Rain Tree Crow, once it got done? Because it's a brilliant album. I think you know that. It gets incredible accolades all these years later. It's just one of those just timeless albums.
We didn't really have a plan. We didn't really have a plan. The only plan was that it could morph into different incarnations of Rain Tree Crow.
Okay.
We were thinking maybe the next Rain Tree Crow could be different, getting other people involved. Maybe not all of us involved. It was just this idea we wanted to take forward.
Kind of an amorphous sort of thing that just
exactly.
Yeah.
And, David had a kind of manifesto for it to start with, a condition in a way, under which
you couldn't use Japan's name, obviously.
That was the main condition. Okay, and we agreed to that. We agreed to it.
But the record label wasn't happy about that, from what I understood.
No, and I would have rather it be called Japan because what's the difference?
Yeah,
the music's different, but it's the same people. So, but he was very keen to make this something different and not take the baggage.
Yeah, stand on its own sort of thing.
Yeah, which is fair enough.
Oh yeah. So we'll go back to real quick to JBK. That kind of comes about then once everything quickly implodes with Rain Tree Crow.
Sure.
And you do the Medium Productions thing. Okay, I guess you guys decide to set up your own label, essentially, right? Your own imprint. And I assume that's because you wanted to bypass the bullshit of the major labels and the way that they kind of treat you. Can you go into that a little bit and like how JBK sort of developed them out of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was to not have to deal with those sort of people in the industry, which is very tiring. To get away from that, to not have the pressure of deadlines, schedules, to just make music that we wanted to make without any outside pressure, and just concentrate on the fan base that we did have to at least get that off the ground.
Right.
And to work with lots of other different musicians, bring other people into the albums, and that was the idea.
How much of an influence? I mean, one reference point I have a little bit with JBK, and if you didn't know, I think I made it pretty clear. I absolutely love that era of your work. I really love most everything that you've done. And this isn't gratuitous ass kissing; it's truth. I think you're really a truly unique artist, and I think the people that you surrounded yourself with at that time, in particular, made for a really unique sort of chemistry. But one of the reference points I kind of have with the JBK material is Talk, later era Talk in some respect, in that it's very different from what you're going to hear on the radio. It's not what you're going to hear on the radio at all in most cases. And, you know, the later Talk is 88, 89 in that era, right?
Yeah.
How much of an influence do you think that played, if any? And did you ever know Mark Hollis and any of the guys in the band? Did you ever have any interactions with those guys, or talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we never did. And you're right. I mean, it sounds like there's a massive influence there.
I wouldn't say massive. I just hear some influence.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's in that ballpark for sure.
Yeah.
And
Color of Spring in particular, I hear.
Yeah, Spirit of Eden, maybe.
Spirit of Eden too, but there's a grooviness and a
and their songs as well.
Yeah, exactly, in that era.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say our version is slightly flawed. I'd say Spirit of Eden is like a amazing album, and Rain Tree Crow is almost there.
Oh, absolutely. I think it really and actually that's a great reference point. Rain Tree Crow is very, very late era talkish, very much so.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
For good or worse, I'm not saying that you guys went in there going, "Hey, let's make Spirit of Eden."
No,
I don't think that's
no,
it at all.
there wasn't a single. No, nobody said anything about that at all. I don't even know whether the other guys were listening to that or not.
Right? Were you though? You were.
I was. Yeah.
Yeah. So JBK, you did quite a lot of gigging, I believe, with that band, right? I mean, now you're doing it though on a much smaller scale than Japan. You're not playing Budokan with that, I don't think, and you're playing more of the smaller, like, I guess, forgive my ignorance, but I'm going to say like the Odeon and places like that, right? Or no? Am I wrong about that?
No, we didn't do many shows though. We did one show in London, which luckily got filmed and recorded.
I've seen that. It's great.
And that was amazing. Really enjoyed that. It was
Is that the one that Steven's playing on?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, 94-ish, I think.
Yeah. And then we did a short tour in Japan as part of somebody else's kind of what would you call it? An evening with type show where there were lots of artists and we were one of them. Stephen did that with us as well, and with Theo Travis, and they were great. But that was the sum total of our live shows, really.
I thought that you guys gigged quite a bit. I guess I was kind of okay.
Steve and I did a couple of shows, or maybe one show, and Mick guested. Likewise, Steve and I guested on Mick's tours
for like what, Tooth Mother and those albums.
Yeah, on around that time. I mean, we did some versions of it with David Torn on guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gavin did a tour with Mick, with Masami Sachir on guitar. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of gigs. There wasn't a lot of shows.
Okay, so this is the mid-90s, basically. And that's a great segue into how you enter into the Steven Wilson, Tim Bowness, the world that becomes where you've spent a large part of your career, latter part of your career. How does all that happen that you become involved with No Man? You become a touring band for you're the touring ensemble, I guess, for No Man at that point in time. How do you come in contact with Steven and Tim and all that stuff? Like, how does all that interwork? And Gavin, for that matter. I was a little surprised to know that Gavin was kind of back in that era as well with you guys.
Well, they, Stephen and Tim contacted us, with the offer to go and have a listen to their music. They were doing a showcase in the West End in London, so we went along and listened. We didn't know who they were.
I was going to ask, how did they know?
They knew who we were.
Right.
They kind of were admirers of our music.
Right.
So they wanted to work with us, and we went along and listened, and it just went from there, really.
What year's that? Do you remember? Was that 93?
Yeah, it would have been 92, 93. Yeah.
92. Okay. Yeah, because you end up joining Porcupine Tree in 93, late 93.
Yep.
And initially you play. Do you play on Flower Mouth? I'm trying to remember. You play on Flower Mouth, right?
I think so.
Or was it later? Was it?
You're asking the wrong person.
Jeez. I'm asking the wrong guy then. Were you?
Yeah. My memories. What is it? We've got a comedian here called Bob Mortimer, and he said my memories are like fingerprints on an abandoned stair rail.
Yeah, I got you. Mine are kind of like that as well. I should have looked that up, but I was pretty sure that you had, and then you did do some I guess what we call it minor touring with them, right? Around
we did, yeah, just
England.
clubs around England. I'm not sure how many shows, maybe I don't know, 7 or 8. Yeah, just playing these little venues.
And at that time, that's when Steven proposes you jumping into the Porcupine Tree fold around that time, right?
Yeah, he had the second album going on, Up the Downstairs, and he said he wanted me to come over and he said, can you just put electronics on this? I've got this kind of trancey sort of thing going, and I think at the time he was quite into the music of the time, which was like the Orb, yeah, those sort of electronic trance kind of things. And so I said, yeah, I'll come around. So I took my gear around and just started playing around with it, and it all just sort of went from there, really. I mean, Stephen was always the very hands-on part of No Man, and Tim was always the vocalizer.
Right. The lyrical vocal thing, right? Yeah,
and the greeter, the person who brought you into it and would talk about the concepts and what they were doing and whatever. And in the other room was Stephen at the desk, just doing what he does.
Mega nerding out on the music.
Yeah, nerding out on the, yeah. And he always seemed to me to be somebody who would just get stuff done. He wasn't afraid to just jump in and do stuff. He probably didn't know that much about how it all worked then, but he was willing to just put himself there and just start working on it and learn.
Well, the interesting part of that, so are you telling me that the first PT you actually heard was Up the Downstairs, or did you actually hear on the Sunday? And because I read in that book,
no, if I heard on the Sunday, I wouldn't have spoken to him again.
I can't actually fault you for that, because had that been the first album I heard first, I'd have been like, what the? I was lucky. I came in at Signify. That's when things started to gel for me. But so you guys you join the band. Colin and Chris become part of that band, and I guess Chris worked on Flower Mouth. I know that. Did you knew Chris before PT, right?
No,
Oh, you didn't.
no,
Okay,
no. That's when I first met Chris
and Colin as well.
and Colin.
And they were band. Colin was a schoolmate of Steve's, I believe.
Colin came along with Steve because he was friends with Stephen at school. Yeah.
You guys do a couple of albums, and they're, for me, they're personally some of my favorite albums, and I'm sure you've heard that before. I mean, Sky, and which was a lot, Steve, to be honest with you, but you were pretty involved in Sky, right?
A little bit.
Peripherally.
Yeah.
But really where you started to come in was more on, as far as the sonic structure of the music was Signify then?
Well, I think Signify was what you could say was the first band album.
Right.
We all went into the studio and we recorded it as a band.
Right.
So, and it had that feel to it. So, yeah.
And you were relying a lot on Steve's demos, but you were allowed, Steve always gave you a lot of latitude to do what you do.
Yeah. I mean, the demos were always very, quite complete,
Okay. Yeah.
They were quite a way down the road, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So some things were written in stone. But on the other hand, there was always the freedom to try stuff. And that's always been the musical relationship between me and Stephen, is that, we just try things. It's just
So you're doing some of your very first gigs with PT, those early ones, which I have video of, crazily, from like Den Haag and the Tin Side and some of these places, Nag's Head. And, you see these videos and, they're sausage parties. It's a shit ton of dudes. There's never any women there, not in those early days. Were you ever looking at these audiences thinking, man, what am I doing here? What did I get myself into?
Well, a lot of people were telling me, saying to me, what are you doing here? Why are you getting involved in this?
Yeah.
A lot of my friends, a lot of, I don't know, people who came along just because they knew me. They'd say, why are you doing this? Why are you doing, But I believed in it. I bought it. I liked the material. I could see the potential. And that was all that was really important at that point. And the fact that every time we did anything, it was always better. There was always more people at the next show. The tracks were always better. The production was always better. Everything about it. And I could see the overall potential right into the distant future. I could see what we were doing last year.
Well, okay. So
Alan, the manager, came up to me at Wembley and said, "Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? Who'd have thought you'd be doing this?" And I said, I would have thought. I said, I thought we would be doing this.
No, I have to ask, did you seriously think when you were playing to 100 people at the TLA in Philly in 2002, you'd be playing to 14,000 people in Argentina? Really?
Well, I thought we'd be playing big theaters.
Okay.
I thought we'd be playing to 3,000 or 4,000 people a night. And that I felt was a given. I didn't necessarily know at that time it would go further, but there you go. I knew it would be something that would be considered successful.
Okay, a couple quick more PT things. How are you doing on time?
I'm all right, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sort of calming down a bit now.
Okay, cool. Because I have some good stuff here, I hope. Anyways, when I come into the scene in 1999, and your life's never been better, of course. But it's all about me, remember? Just kidding. 99 is when I first saw you guys. And I saw you and this is the first time I met all of you. And you won't remember this, but maybe you'll remember the venue. You were playing a venue in DC. This is on the Stupid Dream Tour, your first real full American tour. You'd done a showcase, I think, in New York. You'd done some weird prog fest thing out in San Francisco. And, but this was like the first big real tour. And you guys played this place called the Phantasmagoria, and you were opening for Gong. Do you remember that gig? Do you remember that tour? Obviously.
I remember the sound check because
Okay.
because Gong took about 2 hours to do their sound check.
And you guys got like 5 minutes, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. That place, if you recall, was literally no joke. You walked into the venue. There was a CD store on the left-hand side, like an old style CD racks. You'd flip through used CDs. The room for the show was, it kind of opened up into that, and there was a small stage there, but off to the right when you walked in was a fry bar. Do you remember that? It was a food fry bar where you could get French fries and Cokes and drinks. Do you remember that?
I remember the room. I can picture the room, but I don't remember the fries.
Yeah, I remember walking in there, and there's like, you could smell the smell of French fries and falafel and shit, and you're like, what is going on? This is so bizarre. And there you four guys are sitting there, and I'm like, okay, this is not very rock starish, man. They're just sort of sitting around a cafe table. Am I gonna be that goofball that walks over and goes, hey? And of course I'm that goofball, so I did. I don't really remember having much interaction with you or Colin. Steve and I struck up a brief conversation, and we ended up talking a bit and then exchanging emails. And Chris and I oddly did talk quite a bit too. And the weird thing about that gig, Richard, is that that's where I met Serge in the line at that show. And if you'll remember back then, this is pre In Absentia and all the big stuff that starts to happen in the next few years for you. I was wearing a Frontline Assembly shirt, and Serge saw me. He's like, hey, man, the mating call of rock dudes. We see his shirt, and we're like, hey, you know that band. And so we got to talking, and as it turned out, Serge had the one of only 2 actual Porcupine Tree websites back then. You guys as a band didn't have one. Serge had I think it was called North American PT Fans. Do you remember that?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I did a podcast with Serge, didn't I?
Well, you and me. Well, you did. Oh, you mean on YouTube? Yeah, you did one with him last year.
We were talking about that.
Yeah. Which is crazy. I mean, just thinking back to that, how things went where they did, and that's how Steven and I started to exchange some emails, and before you long, Andy Left got involved, and Karen, I forget her last name, Karen something or other, was like the promo girl at
Karen Lee.
That's it, Karen Lee. Yeah. Flash forward to kind of moving ahead. In fact, I remember pre-release of In Absentia, you guys played. You played up at Nearfest, and then, well, no, this would have been actually, I take that back. You would have played there, the In Absentia pre-release tour that you did. There was like 5 dates. I think you did New York, Philly, and Baltimore, and then you did the 2 West Coasts, LA and San Francisco. We sat down with you and we talked, Serge and I. We did sort of an interview with you and Colin. And I remember you talking about how Steve was very much a benevolent dictator at that point in time back then, as far as writing and getting your input in the music and whatnot. You kind of actually answered this, because my question was like, Steve really wasn't like David then, I assume, in terms of how the band dynamic was as far as playing, or was he?
Well, I mean, the thing is, at that time, Stephen was doing everything, really. He was running the whole PT thing. We all had other things going on the outside.
Okay.
To the point where Chris couldn't always commit to the band because he was doing theatre work and teaching and stuff, and so he wasn't what you would call full-time pro. Almost, it was like semi-pro with us.
Right.
So that was always an issue, and I had stuff going on with Steve and Mick and all kinds of other things. So it wasn't everyone's natural priority, but it was Stephen's, obviously. So yeah, he was doing the brunt of everything, really. So yeah, I guess he was very much the leader of it all at that point. But there was nothing unpleasant or dictatorial.
Right. You guys got along very well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When real quick to tie this up here was looking back. I mean, well, I jumped ahead here. When the band kind of grinds to a halt in 2010, did you foresee that happening? I'm skipping a lot here because if I focus too much on the PT stuff, I won't get much more in the next 15 minutes. I don't want to keep you much more beyond that. But did you foresee that happening? Like from looking back now with retrospect, did you see the things sort of grinding to a halt? Because the way I understood it from Colin was that you guys were going to take a year off, kind of do your own things, recharge your batteries. Steve was going to do a solo album, and then you reconvened. But it ended up being a 12-year hiatus. Give me some feel for what was going on at that point for you.
Well, from my perspective, I thought there'd be a good gap,
Okay.
a good breakaway from it, because it had been very tough, and we'd probably toured too much. When we needed to take a break after Fear of a Blank Planet, I think that would have been ideal. If we'd taken a break, I think we'd have made a better follow-up album, and I think we'd have been fine going on tour again. But we just ploughed ahead in this constant kind of cycle of album tour, and then 2 tours or 3 tours within that cycle. And it just all got a bit too much. The more time you spend on the road, the more you get, it just plays with your nerve ends. You just kind of, things become exaggerated. Your mood becomes more fragile. It was just too much. So I thought by the time we'd done that Albert Hall show, I thought it's going to be a good 2 or 3 years.
Okay, really? Okay. Quite a lengthy gap then. Yeah.
But I never thought that it was going to stop. No, I didn't think that. But then it became apparent that once Stephen got the solo career going, that he didn't really want to go back to the group and that he wanted to carry on with this. So it then became like something, well, and it's not going to happen.
Well, okay, so that brings up a question that I posed to you in writing, and I do want to ask it because I'm curious to know what your thoughts on it. So when Steve's solo album kind of kicks into high gear with Grace, and then he does the 3rd album, which kind of becomes a real, he's building credibility, and the audiences are getting bigger and whatnot. There was a lot of interviews that he would do to promote his solo albums, and invariably every single interview would ask him the same question: when's Porcupine Tree coming back? When can we expect new Porcupine Tree? And Steve's answer oftentimes would be, and again, this is not a shit-stirring thing at all. This is a true, honest question that I feel like I have a little bit more insight into than other people, because I was allowed some level of access with all you guys on a personal level that a lot of fans weren't. I know, probably regrettably on all of your parts, but the point is that he would often say things like, "Oh, that part of my career is done. It's not going to happen. Quit talking about it. It's over." And he would say things like, "I'm playing with the best musicians in the world in my band right now. Guys like Marco Miniman and Guthrie Govan and Aziz Ibrahim, and probably I don't know him, so I don't want to speak about him. But Adam Holzman, guys that are Nick Beggs, world-class players, right? They are world-class players." And Steve has said, and probably would say, he's probably the least technical musician in his own solo bands a lot of the time, right? But when you would see that and hear that, and I know that you did, I know that you saw these things and either read or heard about them, what are you thinking when you hear something like that? Because, if it's me and I'm you, I'm thinking, the fuck is up with that? Like, where did that come from? And that's my first F-bomb, and I'll try to keep them for you, sir. I'm being a good boy. So usually I use a lot more in my interviews. Go ahead.
It's fine. Give me your worst. I think the thing is, you need to look at it from both sides. So from my side, first of all, it really pisses me off. It's like really annoying, because of course, when something's in print, it takes on more importance, doesn't it? You know,
Yes.
people read it, look at it. It's a statement. It remains there.
Yes.
It's not a conversation. It's actually recorded in print.
Exactly.
So that's something that you live with. So if it's an off-the-cuff kind of derogatory statement about the group, then yeah, it's sort of hurtful and annoying. And you just think, well, why can't you just say both things are good? You know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and what does that mean? Best musicians, best at what?
Exactly.
I mean, what are they the best at? I don't know. I mean, it's a different thing. They're people you're paying. You're paying their wages to play what you want them to play and to do what you want them to do. It's not a band.
Right.
They're hired hands.
It's not an equal footing
So
situation.
it's a different thing altogether.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've read that, and I've read things where he said, "Oh, my band do this Porcupine Tree track much better than Porcupine Tree."
Yeah.
So let's now go to his point of view. From his point of view, everyone's asking about Porcupine Tree, and he's trying to promote his solo album and his solo tour, and they keep coming back to this thing, and it's driving him mad.
So he gets frustrated.
People's love for Porcupine Tree, because although it's complimentary, it's the last thing he wants to hear while he's making his own way.
Right.
So his way of dealing with it is to denigrate Porcupine Tree, to quickly say, no, that's not ever happening. I'm enjoying what I'm doing now. What I'm doing is much better. I feel free. I feel happy. And so he puts all the burden and all the unpleasantness onto Porcupine Tree and puts all the positiveness onto what he's doing, because that's his way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
He's since said he didn't believe that. It's just what he says. You
Well,
know, he admits that he lies in interviews, you know, so it's not.
Yeah.
It's not something people don't realize. But that was his way of dealing with it. And you know, once I know that, okay, fair enough. I don't think it's the best way of dealing with it. In any other kind of walk of life, whether if you've got a team leader, as Stephen is in Porcupine Tree,
sure,
then you want your team leader to give a good account of you, and your band. So if you've got a captain of a football team, you'll notice they always give credit to the players.
Yeah.
And if you've got a general in the army, he will always praise his troops.
Right.
You
don't shit on them.
You don't say, "Oh, these guys
suck."
Yeah. So all you're looking for is just to be well represented by your spokesman.
Right.
And of course, when it doesn't happen, then it's really annoying. But he knows I find it annoying, and he knows it's annoying, and he knows that he doesn't really mean it.
See, and the interesting thing about that is, knowing Steve like I do, or did, I haven't talked to him in a long time. I know there's no way he believes that Gavin Harrison isn't one of the best drummers in the world. I also know that he has a high degree, and has always had a high degree, of respect for you. And while you may not be Rick Wakeman, or you may not be Adam Holzman in terms of the technical thing, that was never your thing anyways, and you're openly honest about that. And that's not something that you ever are like ashamed to own. You know what I mean? It's like,
I mean, I'm not in competition with anyone.
Right. Exactly. So I don't think he actually believed that, like you said. I think it was, like you said, it was his way to respond. But I just wondered how, in the moment, now, given perspective 10 years later, it's a different thing. But at the time, you know, had that been me, I'd have probably called him up and said, dude, what the fuck is this? Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you saying that shit? Like, come on, man. That's what I would have done. I'm that kind of a guy. So I was just curious how that sat with you and Gavin, perhaps, because I know Gavin knows he's pretty good.
Well, it's just a thing that annoys you at the time, and then you just forget about it and move on. You know,
Right.
But the only problem is as I said before, it's in print, and when it's in print, it's kind of there forever. But there are things that, you know, bite him on the arse a lot of the time. You know, he's said things in the press that will come back to kind of haunt him, and he's had to deal with that and then explain, which he does. I mean, the thing is, Stephen's a nice guy. and he doesn't wish anything negative on anyone.
Right. Of course.
His way of dealing with the media, I think, is a bit warped.
I remember.
I always found it difficult. So, I mean, he's said things in the past. He said everything, yes, recorded after, I don't know, Relay or whatever was crap.
Shit.
He's kind of dissed Van Halen.
Do you remember the Dream Theater thing?
Van Halen's son, who's a massive PT fan.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
And then he had, do
you remember the Dream Theater? Do you remember the Dream Theater thing?
No, but I'm sure he said.
He kind of, and they took you out on a tour with them in Europe, opening for them, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, if you're going to talk about people, then you have to talk about them in private. If you start talking about them in the press, then that's kind of going to stick, and you're going to have to deal with it at some point.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember he
like
kind of talked about.
Will then say, "Oh, do you remember?"
Yeah, exactly. I remember he talked about Dream Theater and kind of shit on the fact that they're wanky and widdly wanky and stuff. And Mike Portner, huge Porcupine Tree fan, huge Steven Wilson fan. And I remember they did a song called Redemption where they got Steve to record a bit about him saying, I kind of ran my mouth and I didn't mean it quite the way that I did. And I should have said what I said. And you're right. When you put that out there in the media, you have to be a little more savvy and a little more aware of. And I think he is now, certainly.
He is. I mean, to Steven's credit, he kind of admits it himself now. And he kind of, but, we all have different ways of dealing with the media.
Two last PT things. Number one, where do you see things happening? I know there's no pressure one way or the other. It's continuation, it's closure. It could, it might, it may, or it may not. You went, but that said, this tour was, I gather, extremely successful. You played to just as a point of reference, the last time you played Philadelphia, when I saw you, when I was there, before the band disbanded, I think you played to about 1,000 people at the Keswick Theater, maybe 900.
Mm-hmm.
The last time you played there, you were playing to about 3,000 people. The L.A., you go from playing the House of Blues to, I'm not sure, what was the theater? Warfield, not Warfield. Wilshire, whatever it's called, the Bowl, to play in the Greek, where it's 6,000 people. You go to South America, you play to 14,000 people. You go to Hellfest, you play right below Iron Maiden. That's pretty big stuff. And you play to, who knows, 60,000 people. Where does this go from here? Do you have any idea, or don't you really care?
Well, the fact is the American shows were the lowest attended. They were the smallest venues.
Right.
So they all went well. We really enjoyed it, but they weren't the biggest shows we did. In Europe, we were playing more arenas.
Right.
Whereas in the States, we were playing nice theaters.
Big theaters, right.
Big theaters, yeah. Right. Of course, in Mexico and then in Chile, we were playing arenas. Where does it go? I mean, we don't know. The worst thing we could do is put any expectations, give people expectations.
But the fans have expectations, though. That's just part of being a fan. They know it's continuation closure, but I guarantee you, most PT fans are going, okay, we know Steve's doing a solo album and he's going to do that thing for a year or so, but when's the next salvo coming? And could it be? It could be years potentially, but you guys,
Yeah, I think the thing is that it's not easy to. We're not a sort of band who's just going to tour for the sake of it,
right?
Or for the sake of making money. So, of course, we could go out in 2 years' time and tour with nothing new and just to make more money.
And you would.
But we're not that kind of band. We'd have to have some reason for doing it. There'd have to be something new, something interesting, or a completely different set of material, or I don't know. it's not really what we're thinking about at the moment. So we really can't say.
Yeah, and I mean,
the odds have always in favour of it not happening. That's what the odds have always been.
Okay.
More in favour of the band finishing. But it would be silly to say it's over because we can't.
Yeah. And now the dynamic is more of a true democracy that everybody's involved. You're involved from the songwriting aspect, from the tour decisions, from
it's a different beast. It's a different beast, and we're completely relaxed now. Stephen's solo career is established to the point that he doesn't feel he has to bring so much now of himself to Porcupine Tree that he can share in the experience of it.
And was that something he said from the outset when you guys started to reconvene? Okay.
Yeah, he saw no point in reconvening if it was just going to be all his songs.
Yeah. Cool. That's good stuff. Solo material, real fast. So you didn't really actually put out a solo album, your first solo album, until 2005.
Yeah.
Things Buried, which is still one of my absolute favorites. It's just a stellar cinematic album. And then you put another album out fairly shortly after that, Stranger Inside, which I just got. You saw that. And then there was a long gap again for a while. Any reasons for that? Because you kind of, PT had wound down more or less by that time, or close to that period of time. What was there a reason why? Were you just feeling creatively not in the zone? Or?
Yeah, there's always a reason. Is that I only make music when I feel I can do it.
And how does a lot of that start for you, Richard?
I can't work to a schedule. I mean, if somebody says to you, can you make this album, give us a new album by this date? Well, you'll be giving them something, but it won't necessarily be what you would have done naturally.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, it's just, I've gone through a lot of difficult times in life because I haven't kept making music all the time. But you can only make it when you've got something to say, or when you feel you've got something new, or something that you feel excited about and inspired about that can go across a whole album. It's not an easy thing to do.
Well,
so it happens when it happens for me.
In that vein, tell me a little bit, like, how do you have long gaps where you just don't touch the keyboards, you don't mess around with music, and you're just like, I need to disconnect completely? Okay.
Yeah.
And what often leads you to go back or to start to get ideas down? What constructs have to be in place for that to happen, or there's no set formula?
No, it would just be the kernel of an idea, this small little thing that's just nagging away, and it makes me want to try something, and I try something one day, and there's just something with what I've done that is pointing a way forward, and it suddenly starts to open up. It's hard to describe, but it just comes to you. And it might not come to you for years, but when it does, usually it happens very quickly. And
do you have any sort of things that are inspirational to you that you can actually point to, or do you have to be in that moment as opposed to like a broader sense? You know what I mean?
No, there's all kinds of things that influence me, but it's not that it's something that influences you at that moment, and then you have to then act on that. It's a memory. It can be a memory, an emotion. It can be something you read a long time ago. It could be a coincidence, something that happened and made you think, why did that happen? And then you start to go down that line, and a concept starts to develop. It's a ton of things, Jeff. I don't know how to describe it. There's a lot of writers, I mean, real proper songwriters, who will say, I don't know how this happened. It just came to me.
Yeah. Do you find...
Have you ever seen that interview with Dylan where he can't really articulate where it came? He just says there's something magical. There's a process that just happened. and that he can't conjure up that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. We as fans and maybe as music critics, and I don't really put myself in that latter category, but I kind of am doing that now with this thing. Although I actually can play, and I am a musician, and I have some of my own stuff. I'm working on stuff with my daughter too, which is super cool. But and you have to hear her voice. You have to hear her voice. Just trust me. Ask Tracy. You have to hear her voice. But you're right. It's kind of impossible to bottle it up and articulate how things happen. I play the guitar generally every day, a little bit, sometimes for an hour or two, sometimes for 5 minutes. And I'm like, man, you are really sucking today. Just put things down. Don't. Today's not the day. Do you find, is it often a new piece of gear? Is it a new software package? Is it or all these things, a beat that you might hear from some other artist perhaps, or is it all kind of an amalgam of all those things?
Yeah, it's all those things. It's all those things, but the real success of it all is recognizing when it's the right thing.
Yeah.
How
do you know that? How do you know that?
You just know. I mean, if you look at any band or any artist, there's usually a period of time where they're doing this work.
Yeah.
That you think, that's amazing, like over a 5 or 6 year period.
Yep.
And then suddenly they can't do it anymore. And you think, why? Why can't they do this anymore? It's
like they lost the spark.
This thing isn't visiting them anymore. There's something that's not coming to them anymore. Yeah. It's hard to describe. All I can say is that I wait for something to happen, and if it doesn't happen, then I won't make any more music. But
we don't want to hear that.
I don't work to a routine. I'm not particularly personally ambitious. I don't worry about that my profile is going to disappear for 2 or 3 years and that people will forget about me. Or
you're not Steven Wilson.
It goes up and down. Like now I'm in home mode. I can't believe that I've been on tour. That seems like years away. Within 2 days of being back home, then I'm in another mode. And it's just
couple quickies here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make mention of Flame with Tim Bowness, which you did in '94, I believe that was.
Yeah.
Was that simply a matter of you being around Tim a bunch through the No Man thing, and you guys simply going, "Hey, we should do something here"? I've got. Yeah. Were those tracks you brought in, or were they things you collaborated on and wrote, or?
No, I mean I wrote all the music, and Tim would then put a vocal across the top. I mean, it's not the ideal songwriting process because I'm not a songwriter, so. And also the technology of the day, which was ADATs, made it very hard for me in the recording process.
Yeah.
I couldn't just jump in and out of things. Everything, I was doing it all myself.
Yeah.
Engineering. And I can hear it in the music. There are things that go on way too long, that I would love to have arranged it differently, which on a computer you could just.
Yeah, you're in and out. It's easily. Simple with digital stuff. You're right.
You could just change everything around within seconds, But with the
how do you feel about that album?
Quite laborious. So, but I gave the tracks to Tim, and he came up with. He turned them into songs, and his enthusiasm carried the whole thing forward. It worked pretty well. I think people seem to like that album.
How do you feel about that one? You probably haven't listened to it.
I like it. As I said, I think it could have been so much better under different circumstances, but. I think given the technology at the time, I think we made him sound pretty good.
I actually didn't realize that Gavin plays on that album.
He does, yeah.
A bit, yeah. And I mean, there's a song there called Torch Dance, which is really fantastic, and Brightest Blue, which I do think Brightest Blue might be Tim's song, isn't it?
It's a song solo, yeah.
That's a beautiful song, man.
It is, yeah.
And it's just such a evocative album, which. If someone came up to me and said, "How would you explain Richard Barbieri's work?" That's the word I would use. I would say it's evocative. Well, evocative of what? Evocative of everything in a lot of ways.
But Brightest Blue, it's an example of why the strongest songs are always going to come from a singer-songwriter.
Ah, yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah.
I can give someone music, and then it's a challenge for them to turn that into a song. Much as when I work with Steve Hogarth, it's the same thing. So they don't become the greatest songs. They become something interesting, and they have a voice, and they have lyrics, and they have something to say.
Right.
But if you want a great song, it will always come from a singer-songwriter on their own, just, at the piano or guitar.
Sure. Speaking of Steve Hogarth, in 2012 or 14?
Yeah.
2012. You put out Not the Weapon, but the Hand. I know you've spoken of Steve. I'll just call him H. Very fondly. I think you guys are pretty good buddies. And I remember seeing him at around Marbles era when they put out Marbles. I don't remember what year that was in this time frame. Talking to him about you, and his face just light up. He was like, "Oh, Richard, my love." He was just so ebullient about talking about you. Like,
he's one of my biggest fans.
He's a great guy. He was drunk. That was the funny part.
Well, that helped. Yeah, that does help.
That does help. Yeah.
How do you think I got through this interview, Jeff?
Oh man, now you're hurting my feelings, man.
No.
All right. 2012, you put out Not the Weapon in the Hand. Just a quick note on that. How were you guys talking about this, doing that for a long time, or did it just kind of, you ring him up one day and go, "Hey, let's just make an album," or how'd that come about?
No, we'd wanted to do it for a long time, and I love his voice, and I love his lyrics. So it was a perfect kind of matchup for me. Of course, they turned into something other than songs. They turned into this different thing. And he approached them in a different way than he would with Marillion.
Oh, by far, yes.
Yeah. But I think, there's parts of that album where we managed to make something quite unique there.
Well,
really happy.
I would point out a couple tracks. I'd be interested to hear your conjecture on this. Red Kite is a beautiful song. Your Beautiful Face is a beautiful song, and Only Love Will Set You Free, man. Wow. That song is just, it's intensely emotional and beautiful. And I noticed something yesterday listening to that album. There's a spoken word part in that where you're just doing a lot of soundscapey, oral sort of sonic stuff. And Steve says, "Fuck everyone and run."
Yeah.
And that was a later title of their album in 2016. Hadn't picked up on it at that point, but do you have any favorites from that album that you would point to being like that?
Well, that track, we managed to kind of turn that track into, it does come across as a song, as a written song,
right?
Even though I just gave him the instrumentation in its complete form. I love it. It's kind of like poetry, isn't it? I mean, he's telling a story in each thing. The lyrics are great. Your Beautiful Face is a really good track. Yeah. And he's kind of doing this thing where he's probably something he's never done with Marillion. He's just kind of talking through things a lot of the time.
He is doing a bit of that. You're right, which he doesn't ever really do in Marillion. That was always a Fish thing to do, not an H thing, right? Yeah.
I think it could only, that album could only sound that way with us two.
Now, I do not own ArcLight, but I heard somewhere in a recent interview, maybe in the last 6-8 months, that you did. There are some other tracks from those sessions that have or have not been released, or that you're
they're on Bandcamp, actually. They're on.
Oh, they are up on Bandcamp.
Yep, and mine. Yeah.
Okay. Do you ever foresee trying to reconvene with H, or is that kind of a ship that sailed, do you think?
No, it's just all these things take up a great deal of time. You've got to commit a lot of time to all this, and while you're doing it, there's other things that have to be dealt with as well.
Yeah,
there's something about getting old, and time goes quicker.
Well, sir, you know my situation, and I fully understand that more than
you really have less time to do everything, and you have to kind of prioritize. And there's a lot of people who have asking me to work with them, and people I'd like to work with, and because it's so enjoyable. But I'm thinking of it in terms of you know, have I got that time? What if I want to make my own album? What if I want to do this or do that?
Do you second guess yourself a lot as a person?
In what sense?
Well, in just the decisions that you make. Do you just said it right there. Well, what if I start that with him? I won't be able to do that for me, and I won't be, you're married. You and Suzanne have been together forever, and we're going to get to her in 1 second here because I have to talk about my favorite album next. You know what that is. And really, she should be here. I should be talking to her because she'd be a lot nicer to me than you are.
She would, yeah. She'd be a lot politer.
She and I used to talk back and forth way back in the MySpace days. Do you remember the MySpace days?
Wow, yeah, MySpace.
Yeah, we used to write nice little things, nothing weird. It was just, hey, Suzanne, how the cats? How's Mr. B? Stuff like that. She was always very, very sweet and kind to me. So please give her my best and let her watch this next section. But I guess what I was getting at was, do you find yourself ever saying, well, I can't do that because analysis by paralysis or paralysis by analysis sort of thing?
Yeah, you do start to worry about making the wrong choice.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it's something you want to avoid or you don't like that person or you don't want to work with them. You do, but you think, hang on, if I make the wrong choice now, that's going to take up this amount of time. This is going to be the next thing that's written about me. This is going to be what's the latest vibe about, my work. Am I going to do that or can I do that? So I suppose now I'm being more selective with my time because it's going so quickly.
Do you?
There are stuff like with the house that I want to do now. It's sort of just boring things, but
right.
Still stuff that you just think, well, that's going to take time.
The domesticated Mr. Barbieri in his surroundings, right?
Well, I've only had a house for the last 4 years. It's the first time I've ever had a house.
Oh, I didn't actually know that.
I've
Okay.
only ever lived in apartments.
Okay. Are you near London? You don't have to tell me exactly where. I'm not coming.
I'm outside, but yeah, about an hour, within an hour.
And were you always? I meant to ask this at the beginning. Were you born and raised in London area, or okay, you were? I wasn't really sure about that.
Yeah, I've still got a place in London as well. So.
Okay. So we got to talk about this last album because it is my favorite of your albums. I think it's an album that everyone should hear. Like, I kid you not, everyone should hear this album. That is Indigo Falls. And that is the album that you made with your lovely wife, Suzanne, on vocals. Dude, I listen. Sorry, I called you dude, Richard. I know. This is one of those decisions you're regretting the further along we go, right?
No, dude's fine.
No, I think that album is just stunning. It's some of the best songs or whatever you want to call them that you've written. And it's kind of an extension of a Jansen Barbieri Karn album because they play on mixed tracks. Steven's on a track. I was sort of surprised and didn't know this at the time until I was looking at it. By the way, that's one that's going for stupid money. So if you have a box of them anywhere hiding, please, I'll buy one for you at legitimate prices. Jocko Jackson plays quite a bit of guitar on that. Now, I wouldn't have known who that was 10, 15 years ago because he wasn't the Crimson guy. But he was a guy that was clearly known in the London musician pool, I guess, right? Talk a little bit about that album and why has there not been some sort of new material with her amazing voice? And if you want kind of a reference point for me to people that are watching this, if you like Kate Bush, you should really listen to this album because Miss Barbieri's voice is that good. It's different. It's not the quirky same weirdness that Kate can bring on. But when Kate does her natural singing voice, Suzanne and her, man, there's a lot of similarities.
Probably Irish.
Is that what it is?
Well, they're both Irish descent, and yeah, could be. Okay, that album. Well, again, it was probably recorded around the time of Flame as well, so I was still working with ADAT's machines, and so there's a lot of the music that could have been compressed. Let's say we could have made better arrangements. But I think she did amazing with the music I gave her.
Oh.
I mean, she did turn them into songs,
Stunning.
more so than you would expect, considering the material to work with. And yeah, I've listened. Occasionally I'll have a listen to it, and there's some good stuff on it.
Some very good stuff on it. The Wilderness, stunning track, absolutely stunning track. I'm forgetting the next to the last song, Something Falls. I haven't listened to it in a long time, so I can't remember the names of the tracks. It's just, well, to be honest with you, every single track on the album is just pretty stunning to me.
There was this real tension between us when we were doing this as well. It's so funny.
There was.
Yeah, there's never been any kind of antagonistic kind of thing between us, or any tension or any but during that album there just appeared this thing, and in the end we kind of had Steve Jansen as a moderator.
No shit.
It's like a kind of co-producer,
like a marriage counselor,
co-mixer, referee, to just bring some sort of kind of balance to the situation.
Steve Jansen was your marriage counselor during the tracking sessions.
Kind of. It's very weird.
Was it?
And Suzanne will say the same as well. And I don't think we'd have that problem now, but it was just something. But I don't think the music suffered as a part of it.
No. What is there anything else that we don't know about, or was that it? Was that a one?
No, there's a whole set of songs we did that are better than the album, which we should have put on the album.
Where are they, sir?
Well, the songs are kind of there. We'd have to sort of re-record and arrange them, because I don't think I have the multi-tracks. But yeah, they're there.
Come on, man. Come on, man.
There's a couple of boxes of the albums as well.
Oh, you do have some?
Oh yeah, I'll send you some complimentary ones.
Okay, we have to talk then. You must make Mrs. Barbieri aware of how much I love that album. I think it is.
I will play her this bit.
Superlative. Her voice is magical on that album, man. And how are your cats doing, by the way? You still have.
Well, we've got there's different sort of they've come and gone as the years have gone by.
Some have gone to the great kitty.
Where is he? Can you see him?
There he is.
That's Rocky from a long while ago. That's a painting of Rocky.
That's the one. Yep.
Yeah. At the moment, we've got Shadow. He's a black cat, but he's coming up for 12 now, and we've just realised he's got quite a thyroid problem.
Oh no!
So I'm having to medicate him. I'm going to have to go and do that in an hour.
All right. So, I have two wrap up quick questions here for you. Number one, I wanted to ask you. Well, I want to think of which one I want to ask first. Okay. If I were to say to you that you paint pictures and sound from an abstract and atmospheric standpoint that is not necessarily constrained by conventional songwriting constructs, what would you say about that observation? Or is that way too many words?
No, that's fair enough.
That's it.
I have my own relationship with music, I guess, and it's not. I don't have any formal learning, so I don't understand a theory. I don't work out the theory, so that's never been a part of. It doesn't seem a logical process to me. I work in another way. I don't have relative pitch, so I can't necessarily work out what the right progression is for something within a key or something. So I just do my thing. I don't know what to say. I just have my own way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And it's
But
not based on necessarily playing. It's I can hear it in my head, and it's a case of how I make that a reality.
it's bringing what you're hearing here out into the
Exactly.
world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are different ways to do it. And it's kind of why I've not been able to work with that many people or it's why I'm not a session musician, or I'm
Right.
not, but over my career, I've built up relationships with musicians and singers and songwriters who understand my process. So people like Stephen Wilson, Steve Hogarth, David Sylvian. These people know what I do, and they like what I do, and they want what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that kind of frees me up to be me.
To be you, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So on the one hand, it's limiting. I can't sit in on some
jam session
or something. But
yeah, you're not going to be doing Deep Purple's
no,
My Woman from Tokyo on the keyboard.
No, but I can walk in a room with a couple of keyboards and I can start something off that will be different to what
everyone else could do.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
Speaking of Sylvian, real quick, I had a quick adjacent thought there. If suddenly out of the blue he contacted you tomorrow, said, Richard, it's been a long time, I'm thinking about doing an album, I'd love to have you on it, what would you think about that?
I don't know. I'd be very surprised.
Okay, let's go into a magic world for a moment where it might happen. Would you really have to think about that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Not in a musical sense.
No, I got it. In terms of the dynamics.
In terms of what the price is.
Right.
In other terms.
Yeah. The dynamic of
Yeah. What the personal price is.
Are you and Steve still very good friends? I mean, you stay in contact regularly?
Yeah.
Okay.
We do.
I need to dig.
He's kind of somebody who will always be there for each other, and he's somebody that I feel so secure in the knowledge that I trust him completely, and
you have a deep friendship. You have a deep friendship.
Yeah, regardless of how many times we see each other, but that's there, and that's something valuable.
Okay, last thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you sort of to time capsule your career for me a bit, if you could. What achievements have you accomplished that in the moment you found yourself having that sort of out-of-body moment that you were like, I can't believe this is happening to me. This is almost sensory overload. Like, can you quantify that or articulate that?
Yeah. I think probably the third Japan album, the Quiet Life album, where it was the first time that we had studio time where there was no constraints and we could just start overdubbing as well, because the technology had changed. There were more tracks to work with. And I could just go out and say, right, Richard, this is your time now. Out you go. I'd go into the studio and I could, for the first time, I could start making sounds and parts that I knew what was coming next. And I knew I'd be adding that onto this and then that onto this. And all these ideas were just coming to me while there were people waiting in the studio for something to happen. So it's all on the spur of the moment. And I just came up with stuff that I don't think, that I couldn't imagine that I would have come up with. And that's pretty magical. And just being part of the whole process of recording an album in the traditional style in a studio. I mean, that's the most exciting thing of all.
Real quick, my friend Melinda, she had a question for you. You would remember if you saw her. She was in the Chicago posse of PT weirdos.
Okay.
She asked, I'd love to know what his go-to software and hardware is to create with currently.
Well, the hardware is all around me. It's kind of, I've got a whole analog section, and then I've got a whole digital section over there, and tons and tons of hardware. The recording software I use is Reason.
Okay, you're using Propellerhead, is that what it is?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I used to use Digital Performer, But since Reason started using audio into it, because it used to just be a MIDI kind of program, I've been using that, and I've just got Reason 12, so that's the latest one, and it does everything I want it to do. You know, I'm just used to working with it. It doesn't have as pro a reputation as Logic or Pro Tools or those, but they all do the same things.
Okay. So you don't actually use Pro Tools on your home setup for recording that?
No, I don't. I use Reason, and if I go into a studio, and generally they use Logic or Pro Tools in studios,
right?
We just transfer stuff. It's all very interactive.
And then you've got actual analog synth modules behind your shoulder there, right?
Yeah, tons of stuff.
What stuff do you have there, real quick?
Oh God, there's loads. Okay, so you've got, this is all Dreadbox stuff. This is Medusa. This is the Roland SEO2, all analog. This is the Typhon from Dreadbox again, and that's Dreadbox as well. That's the Nix, all analog. This is the old System 700 Lab series from 1976.
Wow.
That's the original Micro Move. That's a Prophet 5. That thing over there is the new Nonlinear Labs C15
in the corner.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's special about that?
That way into this corner is the Prophet 5, Nord, Access 5.
The Nord's the red one.
Yeah, tons.
Wow.
Of stuff.
What's your most valuable one?
Well, this one.
Okay, the 76 module.
Yeah, it's quite rare. It's quite rare. I think there's only about 40 of them made.
Wow, are you serious? And you've had that since Japan, or?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Since like 78.
Did you buy that with your advance?
Yeah.
Okay. I got one last thing to show you. I got one last thing to show you, and then I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
So, let's see if I can find it here.
Oh, it's going to be some old picture, isn't it?
Yeah. You remember this day?
You're so predictable. Oh.
Do you remember that day?
Oh, God.
That is San Francisco, 2005, before you played the Fillmore for the very first time. We've got Steven, obviously, me, Becca, Wes. I don't know who there's what's his name?
It's come up very small on my screen. I've got quite a small screen, so I can't see too well.
Well, there's Adrian, and you're in the corner being all cool with your dark sunglasses on.
Okay.
At night. And then we've got Ian Bond here.
Where you tried to touch me up under the table?
No, that's the last thing we're going out on. So hold on a sec there. We're going out on that because this is the other one here. And this was at oops, there we go. So this is 13 years ago today.
Oh wow.
That is at Radio City. I'm probably about 30 pounds lighter there, which sucks. That's a byproduct of the medication I have to take for my thing. And that is my kid there.
Yeah, I remember.
And
that's your Michael Douglas phase.
Is it? Do I look like Michael Douglas?
Yeah, it's your falling down phase.
Oh, yeah, falling down. Exactly. Yeah, right. Exactly. So, yes. So you brought it up. So we're going to go there on the final caveat out. And that is the fall of 2005. We are in San Diego having sushi. And I know this is your favorite moment of all with Jeff Kiefer. And you know it is too. And you'll lie about it. But you know you loved every second of this. We were at a sushi bar somewhere. And I was sitting on these high stools with Richard and I think Tracy and a couple other people at the table. And I had hooked my feet around the rungs. It was like two rungs that were separated by this much space. And I stuck my foot through the middle rung. And we all get up to leave. And I essentially fall forward. Was not drinking, was totally sober. And I start to fall. And there's only one place. I reach for the table, but there's beer and drinks and everything. And I realize, oh, shit, if I hit that table, the whole table's going to go. Where can I go? My mind is racing. I go for the one soft spot I can think of, and it's right between Rich's legs on a seat. And I try to hit the edge of the seat, but instead I kind of nut punch Mr. Richard Barbieri.
That's a good excuse you've made up there. You've really thought about that excuse. That's brilliant. Really elaborate.
Okay, if you really think I was going for that, I mean,
yeah, we all know the truth, Jeff.
What a funny fun time! What a funny fun time! So, look, sorry about all the issues with the audio, and we did go 2 hours and 11 minutes because of it. So I'm very apologetic to you. Hang on 1 second. I want to say goodbye to you after we end the stream. Thanks to everybody that was here. You guys appreciate it, and share this thing out so that Richard can, people go discover his solo works and his other albums, because this man should be right up there along David Gilmour and Roger Waters and those kind of guys, right? All right, now I'm just bullshitting. But anyway, hang on, Rich. Thanks, guys. See y'all.